Mes chers camarades, bien le bonjour. Le Far West, c'était pas facile pour tout le monde et encore moins pour les femmes. Alors, quelle était leur place à cette époque? Est-ce qu'on avait vraiment des cowgirls? Je suis allé aux États-Unis où j'ai pu rencontrer Renee Laegreid, une historienne spécialiste du sujet. Elle m'a reçu à l'American Heritage Center, c'est un centre d'archives qui est situé au cœur de l'université du Wyoming. Et cette interview, eh bien, je l'ai fait pour les besoins de mon documentaire On les appelle Cowboys, qui est diffusé sur la plateforme France TV. Alors je vous mets ici gratuitement en intégralité cet entretien, donc profitez bien. Elles sont magnifiques ces photos.
Yeah, it is a beautiful photo. Here, sit down and I'll tell you about cowgirls.
Ah. Et alors, là on voit des photos de cowgirls, elles ont vraiment existé du coup?
Cowgirls really did exist. And like cowboys, they are part of the West and they are associated with cows and the Wild West. But cowgirls are very different than cowboys. Because see, this picture right here, we have a woman was standing next to her horse, and she has a rifle and a pistol and a saddle or side saddle. But she is a ranch woman. So she's the daughter of a rancher. And the difference between cowgirls and ranch wives or ranch daughters kind of boils down to how women are perceived in the West. So the West opened up, the cattle industry opened up right after the Civil War. And during the Civil War in the United States and afterwards, it was the progressive era when there were a lot of reforms that were being proposed. One of the proposals was, of course, women's suffrage, but there was also dress reform and the idea that maybe women don't need to stay inside the house all the time, that they don't need to be pious, pure, domestic, and subservient to men. And so these ideas went to the West when the West opened up after the Civil War. And so here you see a woman doing something outside in the open. She's wearing a skirt. It looks like a skirt, right? But underneath this, it's a split skirt. So she can ride astride. Really, when the West opened up, most women were expected to ride side saddle. But to ride side saddle while chasing cattle, very dangerous. And so the dress reform followed coming out West because it was much safer to ride astride like this woman is doing. But still, in this era, this kind of the end of the Victorian era, women are still expected to look very feminine, even though they're shooting and riding a horse. So ranch wives, ranch daughters did what would be considered masculine jobs out on the ranch. But they did it because that's what they had to do. That was part of their daily life.
Du coup, là, elles travaillent dans les ranchs et elles ne vont pas sur les routes pour les transhumance.
Now, for a cowboy, the difference between a cowboy who goes on a cattle drive and a woman, a ranch woman, is that cowboys are hired hands. They are young men generally. They are hired for the season, the cattle season, a trail drive, and they're working men. Ranch wives generally did not go on the cattle drives. There's a couple examples of a few women who did. Molly Goodnight, who was married to one of the famous Goodnight cattle owners, and Cornelius Adar, who was married to John Adar. They went on a cattle drive, but they rode side saddle. And Molly sometimes drove a buggy. And when they camped for the night, they stayed quite a ways away from the cowboys because it's a class issue. Respectable women didn't hang out with cowboys.
Alors je comprends très bien la différence, mais alors du coup, qu'est-ce qu'on appelle une cowgirl?
Ah, okay. I don't speak French, but I think I understood what you said. Okay, the idea of cowgirl actually boils down to one word: performance. And it's taking the things that this young lady did on the ranch and exhibiting it in front of spectators. This is Lucille Mulhall. She was born on a ranch in Oklahoma, and she was very, very good at doing ranch work like any ranch daughter would, but she was really good. And this is an era in the late 1800s when you have Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, you have the emergence of large rodeos where people pay to come and watch cowboys do cattle work, ranch work in the arena. And she started to compete. It was Will Rogers saw little Lucille Mulhall. I think she was 14 years old when she was first roping in an arena with people watching. And he said, that's a cowgirl. Until then, no one had really ever used the word cowgirl. Mm. So a few years later, Theodore Roosevelt is watching her, and he said, that looks like a cowgirl to me. And because he was president, and a lot of people paid attention to what he said, cowgirl actually became part of our language during that time. So until performance enters the picture, what these gals did on the ranch, no one really paid attention to. But now it becomes something. It becomes part of the American imagination. Here we have women doing masculine things. Look, she just roped that big steer, and now she's going, yay, I did, what's my time? And people go, oh, that's a cowgirl. She's wild, she's adventuresome. She can do all the things that guys can do. Now, you put this in the context, too, of the new woman movement, where women are arguing, we don't want to stay at home. We don't want to be pious, pure, submissive, and domestic. We want to go do what the guys are doing. We want an education, like what the guys are getting. We want job opportunities. We want to wear different types of clothing that don't restrict our movement. And so these reform movements and this idea of new women are coming about just at the same time. So the idea of a woman, who can go compete and she can do cool stuff in the rodeo arena, just like the guys, that became very popular. And so the cowgirl becomes not just a real person, but it becomes an idea. And can I be a cowgirl? Okay. I'm wild, I can do things, but there's a caveat. The cowgirl is only acceptable if she maintains some of her feminine characteristics. So if she is out here looking, and there she's wearing a skirt, yeah. and a blouse, and her hair is done very nicely, but if she's dressed like a man, no one would accept that. Same here even. Here's this Sadie Austin, again, with her split skirt. But she's still maintaining that feminine appearance. So a cowgirl is someone who challenges the norms of what women can do, but they have to do it still looking like a woman, still being feminine.
On peut dire qu'en fait, les cowgirls, c'est la figure féminine de l'émancipation.
She's emancipated as long as she still looks like a woman. And you see this even nowadays. Here's a good example. Here we have rodeo queens. Well, they're rodeo riders. So they're rodeo competitors in the 1920s.
They look like a band. On dirait un groupe en fait de musique.
Yeah, they do, like a bad band. But look what they're wearing. They're wearing satin dresses. Look at the type of scarf that they're wearing. Now, in the 1920s, this was a very popular style for children. It's a sailor's scarf. And so by consciously wearing clothing that doesn't make them look masculine, that actually highlights not only their femininity, but also makes them look a little bit like they're playing, like they're children who are playing. They're not threatening the gender order. They're not threatening men, saying, we're going to take over. They're saying, we like to do this, we're good at it, but we're still making sure we don't cross that boundary into mannish behaviors and mannish dress.
Si on revient quelques années en arrière, il y a une émancipation aussi beaucoup plus concrète dans ce que vont pouvoir vivre les femmes au quotidien.
Yes, and that's a great example because here we have another image of four sisters, the Christmas sisters. Now, until 1848, women did not have the right to own property. Part of the British legal system that Americans kept after the Revolution, this idea of coverture, where when a man and a woman got married, she gave up her identity and became under his wing. So any property she owned, any assets that she had, went to him to manage. This is a good reason why when a couple got married, they said, congratulations to the groom. You just got all these assets, and good luck to the woman because you've just given everything to him. Yeah. So in 1837, in the United States, there was a very serious recession. And in the United States, we were just getting into the market economy. It's before we got into the Industrial Revolution here. But so the middle class had been rising. Well, when this recession hit, it really devastated the new middle class, and it lasted for years, like 4 years. So husbands left their families. Wives and children had no way to protect themselves. All of their assets, of course, they couldn't control. They had no legal ability to control their assets. And so this caused state legislatures around the country to consider maybe we need to let women have some access to controlling their property. So in 1848, New York State became the first state with the Married Women's Property Act, and it allowed married women, some control over their financial assets. 1851, in Oregon Territory, just having been split from Great Britain, the Oregon territorial governor was trying to get more people to come out and settle in Oregon. You played Oregon Trail, yes, that's a video game. You know, terrible trek to get all the way over to Oregon. Lots of people died of dysentery, and but how do you get people to move out there? So the Territorial Organic Act, Oregon Territorial Organic Act of 1851, said if a couple gets married before the end of 1851, the wife will get 320 acres of land. It was like a love tonic. Everyone was rushing to get married because they get an additional 320 acres. But that was the first time the federal government stepped in to allow married women to have access to land in a territory. So 11 years later, in 1862, we have the Homestead Act. The first time the federal government allows women, married or not, to be able to stake a claim. Now, married or not, that's a little bit. She has to be head of household. And she has to be over 21. So a married woman, with her husband still with her, cannot claim land. But a woman who is married and maybe her husband deserted her, and she's the head of a household, can claim a Homestead Act. So here we have these 4 young women, the sisters. And 2 of them are 21 years old, and they have staked a claim. And here's their soddy. That's their claim. And the women would have to, or whoever staked a claim, would have to spend a certain amount of time every year at their claim. And so there they are, they're spending some time. It doesn't look like they'll spend much time there because it's not really in very good shape. But these women, if you look at them, they're dressed pretty nicely, and they're actually not homesteading this for themselves. Their father said, go homestead that land because it's adjacent to my land, and by staking a claim, it's going to enlarge our family property. And so all 4 girls staked claims and increased their family's holdings.
Donc les filles sont finalement un moyen pour la famille d'étendre leur territoire.
Yeah, and some women did come out, again, with this new woman idea of women wanting to not be so much tied to a man and start their own ranch or farm. They did come out and start their own homesteads. And in some regions, there were more women homesteaders than men. But to be fair, a lot of these women came out. They put up their little cabin, and then they hired someone to work the land for them, or they found a nice man and they got married. So they weren't truly trying to be totally emancipated. It was a way for them to gain some sort of financial stake.
Et dans cette société très patriarcale, finalement, comment est-ce que les hommes vont voir un petit peu cette évolution du statut des femmes?
Well, that brings up another interesting case because, like I said, some women did come out and start a homestead with the intention of proving it up and getting title to the land. And this woman right here, Ella Watson, is a good example of that. Ella Watson was born in Canada, came down with her family when she was young. They settled around somewhere in Kansas. She got married, and very difficult marriage. Her husband was quite abusive. And so she left him, went to Red Cloud, Nebraska, got a job there as a maid in a hotel. And then she kind of followed the booms, the economic booms going westward. And so she ended up in Rawlins, Wyoming, and took out a claim not too far from there. And she met this guy named James Averill. Well, she staked her claim in this really lovely area. Good grassland, nice creek running through it. And if you drive through Wyoming, you know water is very, very important here. Well, the problem that she ran up against was there was a man named Al Bothwell who also liked that land. Now, he had his own ranch, but in the United States, we have what was called the public domain. So all of this land that was open for settlement, and if you staked a claim, you had access, you had privilege to that land. But if there's land around you that no one had claimed, well, then you could graze your cattle, do whatever you wanted on it. So Albert liked using the land that she had claimed for his own cattle. And when she staked that claim in a very sweet spot, he was angry, and he didn't want to have to deal with her. He was part of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, very powerful cattleman who pretty much ran the territory. So he told her, Ella, he goes, "I want to buy your land." And she said, "No, it's very nice land, thank you very much." Someone came and tried to contest her claim, but her claim held up in court. And so what happened is he became angry that she wouldn't sell. And he started a campaign against her. Telling people that she was a prostitute, that she was rustling cattle, that she was doing all sorts of terrible things, none of which were true. Now, Ella secretly married this guy named James Averill. And the reason it had to be secret was because she staked that claim. If she and James publicly announced their marriage before her 5-year period was up, she would lose her claim, because then she would be married. It's very confusing, I know.
Yeah, it's a movie story. C'est vraiment
yes.
une histoire c'est un film.
Yeah, so they kept their marriage kind of secret. Well, James was her husband, secret husband, was not happy that she, with the Wyoming stock growers, and he'd been writing some very unflattering letters to the newspaper about them, which also made Bothwell angry with him. And so in 1888, Ella bought some cattle, and she wintered them in her pasture. Now, Bothwell lived right next to her, so he saw these cattle all winter long. And actually, some of his cows broke the fence and got into her pasture, so he helped sort the cattle and fix the fence. And then she applied for a brand. You have to apply for your brand here to register it. She was awarded the brand. She bought her branding iron. She didn't brand her cattle until July of 1889. Not really sure why, but she didn't. And so the day after she branded her cattle, she and one of the young wards that she had sort of adopted two orphan boys. And she and one of the orphan boys had walked down to the river. There was some native women down there who were selling moccasins, and she bought some moccasins. They were walking back, and she came up to their house, and there was Bothwell with 4 other guys. They were tearing down her fences, scaring the cattle off. And she go, what are you doing? And he said, you have been rustling cattle. You've been stealing cattle. I have proof. Get in this buggy. So they forced her into the buggy, drove over to Averil's house. He was actually on his way to town, but they got him out of his buggy, put him in the buggy with her, and off they went on this wild ride to the Sweetwater River. She had been telling them, I have proof that I bought the cattle. The bill of sale is at the bank. Let's go to the bank. I'll show you the bill of sale. And he said, nope, don't want to see it. We know you've been rustling. So this group of 4 or 5 men took Ella and James to one of the few trees. I mean, we don't have a lot of trees here. Strung them up and hanged them, lynched them. Now, one of her wards had run to the neighbor's house and said Bothwell took Ella, and so this one man had followed them to try to help them. So he witnessed the hanging. That's how we know what happened. The historical record knows what happened. Then one of the men got on his horse and rode bats out of hell to Rawlins to send a telegraph to Cheyenne, to the newspaper in Cheyenne. Now, lynching people is bad. Lynching people is, in a sense, a form of intimidation. It started off during the Revolutionary War as a way of punishing people for certain crimes, the punishment kind of fitting the crime. After the Civil War, especially down the South, it became a mechanism, generally capital punishment, for enforcing certain powers and privileges. It became a form of intimidation. And so hanging this young couple, was not going to be received well, especially hanging a woman. Yeah. So they had to control the story. And this one writer went to Rawlins, a telegram was sent to the Cheyenne Ledger, and immediately a story came out. And the story comes out not of Ella, a young woman who was raising 2 orphan children, who was taking care of cowboys by mending their clothes. She worked with James Averill at his place, which was also a post office, cooking meals. She had no. All of a sudden, Ella Watson is this horrible person. She's a prostitute. She's a cattle rustler. She's an evil woman. And she deserves to die.
Combien de temps ça a pris pour que la vérité, finalement, puisse émerger?
This story was accepted as truth, for the most part, for almost 100 years. And what happened is there was a man who was helping the United States celebrate its anniversary, and he's from Wyoming. He was a musician, and he wrote an opera about Cattle Kate, the notorious woman. And after he presented this opera around the state, he started getting letters saying, you know what, my grandparents knew about this. That's not the real story. And so he started digging. He started asking questions and looking for documents. And he discovered really that it wasn't Ella who was a terrible person, that the newspaper reporter had conflated the story of a native woman who lived further up. I forget exactly what town she lived in, but who really was a prostitute and who was a really, pretty dangerous woman. But their names were sort of similar, and this other woman had been in the newspaper a little bit, so it was like a very easy way to conflate the story of a real notorious woman with a very nice young woman, to make it seem like this woman was the one who was the evil person.
Est-ce que le cas dès là, finalement, c'est un cas isolé.
No, and this is what's really interesting. This story is very local. It's local to Wyoming. Not many people outside of Wyoming actually know about Cavalcade or Ella Watson. But 4 years beforehand in Nebraska, a woman had also been hung for cattle wrestling. And it's the same thing, really in the fact that women owning property was still so very, very new. And men who wanted the woman's property would become angry if they wouldn't let them. Now, in Ella's case, Albert Bosworth offered to buy her property many times, and she said no. And he was angry that she could control property as a woman. In the Nebraska case, it was a young woman. She and her husband, they were Welsh immigrants. They moved to Spring Ranch, Nebraska, and Eliza Jones married this man, Taylor. So it was Eliza Taylor. And because of the Married Women's Property Act in Nebraska, she could own property. So when her husband became ill, he deeded the ranch, all their property, into her name. Now, it's perfectly legal, but again, at the time, people didn't think that was normal, that was right. And so the husband was looked at like, why are you giving your wife the ability to control your property? Because she could do anything now without requiring his permission. And 1 year later, and they looked at her as like a very mannish woman, a shrew, a terrible, terrible bully in the family. A year later, her husband died. And so, going back over the records, why did he transfer the property to her? Well, he probably knew he was sick. And by giving her title, sharing title through the Married Women's Properties Act, he would know that the ranch would stay in her hands and with their children. So after he died, the neighbor started coming over, said, "Let's get married." And she said, "No, come on." And he kept coming over for months. "Let's get married." "No." Well, the last time she told him no, she's pretty forceful about it, and off he went. But then he started the smear campaign around her. Now, beforehand, people considered Eliza, just this really sweet woman. After her husband died, Liza and her twin brother, Tom, they went into a joint livestock venture together. So they realized, where they lived in Nebraska, raising cattle was much more profitable than trying to have a farm. So she would deal with the livestock owners, and she would go to the cattle sales and buy things. Now, again, if I did this nowadays, no one would bat an eye. But back then, a woman engaged in business with men, that was seen as very, very dodgy. So, and Tom stayed at the ranch, and he took care of the cattle. Well, they needed help on the ranch to keep things going. So they offered free tobacco, free room and board to anyone who would come work on the ranch for them. And they got a lot of cowboys coming through. Well, they only stayed, a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month, and then off they'd go. So the townspeople were like, "Oh, she must be running a house of prostitution. And, where are these guys going? And what's happening over there?" So her reputation began to falter. Now then, there were some other things, and Reese T. Reese, the man who wanted her property, kept poking. She's a terrible woman. She's doing bad things. She's murdering people, I think. And one day, he gathered a number of men together and said, "We got to stop this. This woman is destroying our town." And so, in the middle of the night, they showed up at Tom and Eliza's house and said, "Get out of the house." They took him down to the river, and they hung him on the bridge over the river. Once again, how are you going to explain to people that you have murdered a woman? You have to convince everyone that they did it to protect the community. And this is kind of the vigilante narrative. Poor Eliza or Ella, they didn't have a chance to tell their story. They were dead. But the vigilantes, the ones who actually hung them, were the ones that constructed the story to everyone else, why this had to be done.
Vous travaillez beaucoup sur la figure féminine dans le Far West et sur les cowgirls. C'est quoi l'objectif pour vous?
If you think about the movies that you see, especially the ones that came out, I don't know, the 40s, 50s, 60s, with John Wayne and all those guys, what's the role of women in those movies? They're there for decoration. They have really no role. They're helpless, they get rescued. Maybe there's a bad woman in there and she must always die. The bad woman always has to die. But when you look at the history of the West, women were at least half of the population, maybe less in the very beginning, but they became more. Their part in the economy of the West is enormous. The men couldn't have come out on their own and done and settled the West, ranched the West, without women helping them. And so not only is it the economic impact of women that had been overlooked for so much time, but how about the cultural aspect? And how did women's roles in the West, when they're out there, for example, fighting for the right to be able to ride astride rather than side saddle, how did that impact the rest of the country? How did that really shape or inspire the reform movements back east because of what was going on in the West? And I think the idea of the cowgirl, too, is really important because, you know, the idea of the cowgirl is so powerful. It's a woman walking down the street in New York can think, I'm a cowgirl. I can do this. When I travel through Europe, I travel by myself quite a bit. And my relatives will ask me, aren't you worried, you know, traveling by yourself? And I say, no, I'm a cowgirl. And they go, oh, well, of course, that explains everything. So this idea of being emancipated, having the confidence and the courage to do what needs to be done, not always relying on men to do things for you, and yet still being feminine. That's a very powerful message, and a lot of women like that message. And I like following that kind of cultural story of how the idea of the cowgirl has expanded beyond what we see in the West to being a worldwide phenomenon.
Merci aux équipes de TSVP, la société de production avec qui j'ai travaillé sur ce projet et qui ont monté ces interviews. Vous pouvez retrouver mon documentaire sur les cow-boys, mais aussi celui sur les samouraïs que j'ai tourné au Japon directement sur la plateforme France TV. Je vous mets un petit lien en description et commentaire. À plus.